approaches, which are known as approaches. So one is the normative approach and the other is the empirical approach. The first approach emphasizes norms and values. For example, Plato, Rousseau. Okay. But then those thinkers who emphasize the facts, of political ideas. So one is justice, the other is the equality, the third is the rights. Even we can include the democracy as well, the fourth one. However, from justice to democracy, these are not just ideas, but these are values, these are norms, these are principles which are supposed to be adopted, which are supposed to be inculcated, internalized. On one hand, the state, the government machinery, the political authority on one hand, and we, that is the society, the people, the citizenry on the other hand. So therefore, we had referred to preamble to the Constitution of India. So there is a set of values in preamble to the Constitution of India, Indian preamble, let us say, which reflects these values: justice, equality, okay, rights as well. Democracy also is part and parcel of the resolution by the Indian people. Okay. So these are not just ideas, chapter number 3 to 6, but these are values, these are principles, these are norms which are to be adopted, accepted, internalized as far as political life is concerned. Then, though in brief, we also discuss the concept of power. Now, power is what? Simply speaking, power is currency, as if a currency for pol science, like money in economics. So power enjoys the same status and position in pol science as money enjoys in the subject of a discipline of economy. Without power, we cannot understand, make sense of political life. Okay. And there are two forces in pol science that we are supposed to study. One is the state, one is the government, one is the public authority, and the other is again the society, the people, the citizens, if we are talking about the democracy or democratic political system. Now, state has power, but what kind of power is that? Power which is consented by people. So it is legitimate power, which is known as authority. So state enjoys power, which is legitimate, which is consented by people. So state enjoys authority. Now, power authority, we'll look into that later on. So if it is legitimate power, if it is authority, then what is the central point as far as the authority enjoyed by the state is concerned? The central point here is the right which is vested in the state to take decisions for all of us, that is for the entire society. So what is the peculiarity of the authority enjoyed by state? It is the central peculiarity of the authority enjoyed by state that the state, through that power, through that authority, makes binding decision for all of us. Now, on the other hand, each society associated with the phenomena of power, yes. Individual as part of society, groups as part of society, pressure groups as part of society, maybe agitations, maybe social movements, these are also part and parcel of society. So all of us, right from just an individual, a single individual, to a pressure group, yeah, maybe an organization. Okay, from individual to an organization, each element of society try to influence the state's decision-making process so that state can make laws, state can frame policies which will protect our interest. So this is how both society on one hand and the state on the other hand are integrally connected with something called as the currency of pol science, that is the power. Okay. Then we discuss political ideology with two aspects. Political ideology as set of ideas, and these ideas are arranged in a coherent manner, in a systematic manner. Okay, not in an incoherent manner, in an hodgepodge manner, but rather in a very coherent manner. So that is what ideology generally is known as: set of ideas, set of coherently arranged ideas, number one. But what do we do through the set of ideas which are arranged coherently? हमने कल कहा था अंडरस्टैंडिंग सोसाइटी, यानी कि मेकिंग सेंस ऑफ द ह्यूमन एग्जिस्टेंस, obviously including the past, the present, and the future. So that is one very important function of political ideology as a set of ideas. And the other aspect that we had underlined yesterday was different ideologies in political science, obviously political ideologies, provide present various different varying formulas about what? That important function in any society, that is distribution of resources. So liberalism as a set of ideas provides us a particular kind of formula which is generally known as free market economy. Socialism demands ownership of the society, that is a collective ownership, and the use of those resources, production, distribution of resources. Okay, all these matters are to be decided keeping in mind the interests of the society, not private interest, some sectional interest, but rather the interest of the entire collectivity or entire society. Okay, so these are two very important aspects of political ideology, and we have from liberalism to feminism. We'll look into that. We had already taken note of Western political thought. Now let us look into that, though briefly. What is political thought? Now, political thought is an intellectual response by a particular thinker to his/her socio-economic political conditions. Make that simple. Now, Plato, we have been referring to Plato. Plato vehemently criticizes democracy which existed in his own city-state called as Athens. And we saw the reasons for that. Okay. Number two, he also criticized the Athenian democracy and the democratic rule for being responsible, that is, being responsible for the death of Socrates. Rather, it was a political assassination. That is how he diagnosed death of the trial and death of Socrates. That was another point. So Plato was responding to the socio-economic conditions that were part and parcel of his own period, and the place he came from, Plato comes from, that is the Athens, which is ancient Greek city-state. So similarly, Aristotle also responded intellectually to the existing, prevailing socio-economic conditions. We also briefly refer to Karl Marx, who comes from 19th century, and Karl Marx makes it a point to respond very critically to the existing capitalism. And he argued that capitalism as it existed in Europe, including Germany, France, England, so on and so forth, capitalism as an economic system is deeply exploitative in character. It cannot benefit the workers, that is the class of workers. And then he argued that exploitation in capitalist system would increase day by day, that would reach to a tipping point, and that would result into the revolution by the class of workers. So this is Marxian way, a particular way of responding to the then existing socio-economic conditions. So is the case of Gramsci, and so is the case of only woman thinker, Western thinker, that is Hannah Arendt. Now, Hannah Arendt was part and parcel of the Nazi regime. Okay, she was victim of Nazi regime and the brutalities that Hitler as a leader of Nazi regime, that is the Nazi German regime, had what undertaken. So that shaped the idea, the intellectual response of each and every individual. So simply speaking, now what is the title? Western political thought. So this is a very primary sort of discussion. When we open up this topic separately, we will look into much more deeper as far as the meaning of political thought is concerned. But as of now, it is sufficient to say that political thought dash given political thinker is nothing but intellectual response to existing social, economic, and political conditions. Now, let us take this frame and try to understand the Indian political thought. ये हमारा discussion बाकी था ना, Indian political thought था. अब there are two elements of Indian political thought. Which are those elements? There are two elements. Yes. So one is the ancient. So let us say it A, which includes Dharma Shastra, Artha Shastra, and the Buddhist tradition. So three traditions which are part and parcel of the ancient one, ancient political tradition. And the other is obviously the modern one. Okay. These are the traditions. We'll look into that. What is mean by Dharma from the Dharma Shastra tradition? So Dharma emerges as a universal principle, not Hindu as a dharma or some particular dharma. So duty, and not only duty, but dharma is that principle, overarching principle, the ultimate universal principle, which regulates the entire universe. So that is how the term dharma, the idea dharma, was understood in the tradition called as the Dharma Shastra. We'll look into that. I'm just introducing you. Then Artha Shastra. Now, there is a long tradition of Arthashastris in Arthashastra tradition, and the prominent one that we know of is Kautilya, obviously. Okay, here in ancient sort of Hindu tradition, we have two currents, say for example, here are two streams. So one is the Dharma Shastra, where Dharma regulates, Dharma is the regulating principle, and Dharma is the supreme principle. The state is supposed to uphold the dharma, serve the dharma. Therefore, this is a very interesting tradition in Hindu, that is the ancient Hindu political thinking, Dharma Shastra tradition, wherein what is the regulating principle? What principle is the ultimate principle? The dharma is the ultimate principle, and the state, the government, the monarch, the king has to serve the ultimate principle called as the dharma. Okay. Whereas we have another tradition from ancient Indian political thinking, that is Arthashastra, which emphasizes on what? The Artha. That is the material aspect of the human existence. And Kautilya is quite prominent for this second stream as far as the ancient Indian political thinking is concerned. Then we have the Buddhist tradition. In ancient India, there is a very important tradition which is known as Shramanic tradition. And Buddhist tradition is one of the very important element of the Shramanic. Jains are there and so many others. Okay. Now, Buddhist tradition is understood as a kind of intellectual revolt against especially the tradition of Dharma Shastra. Okay. Intellectual revolt. Now, the tradition of Dharma Shastra advocated and justified the Varna social order, Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra. That was a hierarchical social order. No. We'll look into that. Now, yes, there is a reference to Veda, but Vedanta is something very different. Okay, we'll look into that. As of now, there is an intellectual tradition. We'll look into the technical details later on. So there are Dharma Shastris. Now Mahabharata is also something which is part and parcel of the Dharma Shastra tradition. But the prominent one that we are going to discuss is that of Manu. Okay, Manu Smriti is part and parcel of that. So it believes in, it advocates, it justifies the Varna social order. 4 Varna: Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra. No, that is what we don't have any option. But Manusmriti is understood as the representative of all of them. All of them. That is a prominent one. Okay. So it is because of the prominence that Manu enjoys. Yeah, Manusmriti enjoys. Okay. And that has been quite influential as far as the legacy of the Varna social order is concerned. Okay. So 4 Varnas hierarchically organized, not at the equal position, but rather hierarchy. सबसे ऊपर कौन है? Brahmins, then Kshatriyas, then Vaishyas, then Shudras. And then there were outcasts, the untouchables and the Chandas in those days. Okay, referred to as. Now, what Dharma Shastra does here, yes, it does talk about the state, the ruler, but the ruler, the central responsibility, the main responsibility of the Raja, of the monarch, of the king, of the ruler is to uphold the Dharma order. So therefore, the state in Dharma Shastra tradition does not enjoy autonomy. It has to subserve, it has to serve the cause of the Varna order. Okay, so that distinguishes this tradition from the Arthashastra. Now, whereas Kautilya, representing another stream from ancient Hindu political thinking, that is Arthashastra, emphasizes on Artha, that is the material dimension of the life. And he very elaborately Kautilya talks about, discusses the statecraft, something called as the statecraft, the Saptanga theory, the 7 limbs of state. And Kautilya, sort of who is known as by so many scholars as the first realist, the first Indian realist, and almost more than 1.5 millennia before Machiavelli. Okay. So Arthashastra we'll discuss elaborately. Now, he was a realist, no doubt about that, who emphasizes on the material, on the economic dimension of the human existence, and focuses on the state, the kind of state the society required according to him. And as part of that, he discusses the Saptanga theory and so many other elements of the his political idea. Buddhist tradition, as I stated earlier, intellectual revolt against, if we want to use Marathi word, karma kand, okay, which was practiced by especially the Dharma Shastra and the Smritis. Okay. Now, since Buddha and Buddhist tradition was an intellectual revolt, it preached a very simple life. Okay. And also advocated certain principles which are very important. And even Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar argued that whenever we talk of liberty, equality, fraternity, then we are reminded of the French Revolution. But Ambedkar argued that my Buddha had given me liberty, equality, and fraternity. Okay, so Buddha preached equality, liberty he talked of. If we take note of the Sangha, with the Buddhist Sangha, we look into that. So, precursor of so many modern values and ideas. And therefore, Dr. Ambedkar makes it a point to take the origin of parliamentary democracy, not to the French Revolution, but trace back to the Buddhist tradition. This is very, very interesting. We will look into that. And then we come to the second aspect of the Indian political thought, which is the modern one. As I was saying about the Western political thought emerges in a context. This context is very important. And this is a key to understand each and every political thinker, be it from the galaxy of Western political thought or modern Indian political thought. What is this context? So when we say context, then context ke do pehlu hai. So one is the period. Yeah, you can say the era. You can say the time. Okay. And the other is the place. You can say the region. or even you can say the society we are talking of. Okay, now we can describe the context including both the period and place. Okay, this is date and this is location. This is date यानी कि period, era, and this is location means place. So context is very important in order to understand any political thinker, be it Plato या M.N. Roy. Okay, but when we say context, so this is one interpretation of context. समय भी है, period भी है, और दूसरा place भी है. The same can be understood, as I was referring to in earlier a while ago discussion, socio-economic political conditions. What? The context is nothing but, simply speaking, social, economic, and political conditions as existed during that period in a whatever place we are talking of, we are referring of. Now, let us take it to the modern Indian political thought. What was the context of modern Indian political thought? In what context Sir Syed Ahmad Khan was propounding his ideas, did propound his ideas? Sri Aurobindo, Gandhi, Ambedkar, and Roy. What was the context to which they were intellectually responding to? What was the context which shaped their political thinking? And we know for sure that keyword, this was the context, colonialism. So unless and until we understand colonialism, at least the salient features of colonialism as a regime, as a setup, okay, it would be very difficult to understand as to what did Sir Syed Ahmad Khan say in his political thought. And so is the case of M.N. Roy. We'll look into that. So context is very important. अब हमने कल थोड़ी चर्चा करते वक्त ये भी कहा था कि Gramsci, now who comes from Italy and the southern part of Italy, that is the Sardinia, the province Sardinia. Now southern Italy in 1920s, 1930s, the period in which Antonio Gramsci was writing, when fascist regime had emerged in Italy under the leadership of Mussolini. So if we take note of that context, okay, then it is southern Italy, and southern Italy was relatively, in comparison with the northern part of Italy, the southern Italy was relatively very backward. It was predominantly the part of Italy which was known for agriculture as the major source of livelihood. Peasantry was, okay, the major class. Workers, that is the agricultural laborers, were another important class. And Catholic Church enjoyed a substantial amount of influence in southern Italy. So, industrial revolution, modernity had not entered the southern part of the Italy. And that is the kind of part of Italy that Gramsci had, rather Gramsci was part of. He came from that part. So this place is also very, very important. How it shapes Gramscian idea and his concept of hegemony. We will look into that. Okay. So whenever we are supposed to take note of the modern Indian political thinker, आप थोड़ा समय के हिसाब से देखते हैं तो Sir Syed Ahmad Khan comes from 19th century. Okay. And then Sri Aurobindo, the last leg of the 19th century and 20th century. Okay. So as if the Indian National Congress was sort of transitioning from the moderate phase to the extremist phase. Okay. And then we have Gandhi and Ambedkar and also Roy from the 20th century. Okay. So 1920, 1930, 1940. This is the period. Now this period is very important as far as colonial regime is concerned. By then, Indian nationalism had grown with all its dimensions. We had undoubtedly become aware of the fact that this is not only a foreign regime, but this is deeply an exploitative regime. And we had started demanding, okay, what? Independence. Yes, Swaraj. The resolution of the Lahore Congress is very, very important. Complete independence. Okay. And then dhire, we also we started demanding establishment of a body which will produce our own constitution. Okay, so dhire badhta. Now, in the 30s, 40s, 20s, 30s, 40s, we get to see the political ideas propounded by Gandhi, Ambedkar, and M.N. Roy. So always keep in mind briefly colonialism, but we'll get back to that later on. Okay. So, thus, to summarize the entire discussion, let us get back to the basic ideas और वो थोड़ा सा डिस्कस भी करते हैं उसको. So this is the syllabus of section A of paper 1. Now, simple सी भाषा में, what are we ultimately going to discuss as part of section A of paper 1? First, political ideas या concepts. Okay. Number 2, political thought. Number 3, political ideologies. And then comes 4th, political theory. Now, there is no doubt that our syllabus opens up this one. That is the very first chapter is political theory. But I have placed right at end of the sequence. Now, very simply speaking, these are the 4 elements of the syllabus, which is arranged in the form of 10 topics. Okay, from political theory to Western political thought, which can be rearranged like this, and always keep in mind this framework. First, idea. Now, simply speaking, political ideas, yeah, any political idea, such as justice, such as rights, such as power, such as state, such as government, authority. We have so many ideas in political science. Now, ideas are nothing but, let us use a common word, building blocks. What are ideas? Ideas are building blocks. मतलब क्या है उसका? Building blocks का मतलब क्या है? What do we do with building blocks? We construct, we erect a wall, we produce a wall. Okay, so ideas are building blocks in the sense these are the fundamental means, instruments through which we understand the political reality. These are linguistic means. है ना? Idea का मतलब क्या है? हम सोचते हैं and we conceive and we use a word, justice, freedom, equality, sovereignty. Yes, that's why building blocks are known as foundation. But foundation in what sense? Not in usual sense of the term. Ideas are building blocks. They are the instrument to understand the political reality. Now, अगर मैंने आपको सवाल पूछा, what kind of political system India has today? तो आप immediately बोलोगे democracy. Now imagine कीजिए, I do not know anything about democracy. तो आपको मुझे समझाना पड़ेगा, ये ऐसा होता है, ऐसा होता है, ऐसा होता है. Now, in order to elaborate upon the democratic form of political system, you will have to introduce me first to basic ideas. कि देखिए ये सोसाइटी है, ये स्टेट है, सोसाइटी को रेगुलेट करना पड़ता है, तो रेगुलेट का मतलब पता चलना चाहिए, so on and so forth. So ideas are, और एक शब्द हम इस्तेमाल कर सकते हैं, ideas are, concepts are, and we are discussing about political ideas, political concepts. Political ideas are nothing but linguistic tools to understand the political reality. As simple as that. These are linguistic tools to understand the political reality. And we'll come to know about that. We'll have a detailed discussion of that. So building blocks, linguistic tools, means and instruments to understand political reality. अब फिर से उसी तरफ जाते हैं. What does our subject pol science do? What does our subject, our discipline called as political science exactly study? तो जेनरिक आंसर तो हमारा हो सकता है ना कि पॉलिटिकल साइंस एज अ सब्जेक्ट डिसिप्लिन स्टडीज द पॉलिटिकल लाइफ, यानी कि पॉलिटिकल डायमेंशन ऑफ आवर लाइफ. बट हाउ डू वी मेक सेंस ऑफ द पॉलिटिकल डायमेंशन ऑफ लाइफ? In order to make sense of, in order to understand, in order to conceive that, in order to analyze that, we require words. General words, but then we require certain terms which are political in nature, है ना? Which are part and parcel of the political life. So therefore, अब ये सब words देखिए, political theory is an idea. Justice is an idea. Power is another idea. Okay, so on and so forth. We have number of ideas. So ideas are linguistic tools to understand reality. Now, similarly, the subject of sociology has so many pertinent ideas. So is the case of economics. So is the case of history. So is the case of psychology, philosophy, anthropology, and so many natural sciences. Without ideas, without concepts, we cannot just go ahead in the process of making sense of the reality. So ideas are thus building blocks, thus foundational, thus the linguistic tools to make sense of the political reality. Making sense का मतलब understand करना, है ना? Okay. दूसरा है political thought. A while ago, I very briefly defined political thought. What is political thought? Political thought is nothing but an intellectual's intellectual response to her socioeconomic conditions. So Plato's political thought, Aristotle's political thought is nothing but the way and manner in which Plato responded to the prevailing socioeconomic conditions. We can say the same thing about M.N. Roy's political thought. We can say the same thing about Dr. B.R. Ambedkar's political thought. जिसको हमने क्या कहा है? इंटेलेक्चुअल रिस्पॉन्स, इंटेलेक्चुअल. ओके, दूसरा कहा है किसको, किस चीज को? तो हमने कहा कि सोशियो इकोनॉमिक कंडीशंस या कॉन्टेक्स्ट भी हम इस्तेमाल कर सकते हैं. ये दूसरी चीज हुई. फिर एक सवाल आ सकता है कि व्हाट डू वी गेट टू सी इन द इंटेलेक्चुअल रिस्पॉन्स? करते क्या है वो? इंटेलेक्चुअली रिस्पॉन्ड करते का मतलब क्या करते हैं? तो प्लेन एंड सिंपल भाषा में दे रिफ्लेक्ट ऑन देयर सोसाइटी, द कंडीशंस ऑफ द सोसाइटी, whether the conditions are good or bad, right or wrong. I'm making it very simple. Okay. And then they will go deeper further and try to make sense of if the conditions in the society are bad, then who is governing the society? Who is controlling the society? Thus, they will turn their attention to the state. They will turn their attention to the governing body. What kind of government, what kind of state, what kind of governmental structure the society has. और फिर उसके अंदर जाएंगे, जैसे प्लेटो ने किया. प्लेटो क्रिटिसाइज एथेनियन डेमोक्रेसी vehemently, arguing that democracy is a form of government where even incapable person becomes ruler. And for Plato, only capable person must occupy the position of what? The public decision making process, यानी कि गवर्नमेंट. किसको करना चाहिए गवर्निंग का एक्ट प्लेटो के हिसाब से? Those who have reason and those who have wisdom. So this is how Plato was responding intellectually to his socioeconomic conditions, his context. यानी कि 5th century BC, 5th century BC पीरियड भी है और प्लेस भी है. पीरियड है 5th century BC और प्लेस है Athens, one of the very prominent Greek city state. So I guess this is more than sufficient. So be it Western thought या be it इंडियन पॉलिटिकल थॉट. हाँ, पॉलिटिकल थॉट में कुछ एलिमेंट्स है. स्टेट इज अ वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट एलिमेंट. स्टेट डैश गवर्नमेंट. नाउ कैन वी इमेजिन अ पॉलिटिकल थॉट विदाउट स्टेट, विदाउट गवर्नमेंट, विदाउट पावर, without certain ideas? We can't conceive political thought without state, without government, without public authority, without some mechanism to control and regulate the society. हम सोच ही नहीं सकते ना political thought का, because political thought is about the political life of the human being. And what does the thing political contain? तो हमने कहा कि public affairs होते हैं उसमें. Okay, and then we will subsequently discuss about that. If there are more than one individuals, more than one human being on this planet, then we are going to have inevitably politics, because we have we have differing ways of looking at things. We have therefore different opinions. We have different interests, therefore we are at different level of development. So we are bound to have not only differences of opinion, but we are bound to have serious kinds of conflicts and disagreements. So therefore, unless and until now, who would want one's own life to be immediately annihilated? No. Each one of us would always want to have a long life. But long life requires, fundamentally speaking, security. Fundamentally speaking, stability. But who is going to give us stability? Because here we are not talking about life of one individual. Here we are talking about a society, talking about a collectivity. So if we want a stable life, if we want a secure life, and subsequently, if we want a developed life, economic progress, economic growth, so on and so forth, then you require some governing mechanism. That is how in human life and human societies, state as an institution of governing the society evolved, emerged. So political thought invariably, inevitably is going to consist of certain elements, such as state, such as government, such as governing structure, such as power. Now, can we think of political thought without power? It is very difficult. Okay, so state and society, these are going to be the two mega components of the political thought, be it Western, yeah, be it Indian. I guess this is more than sufficient. Then comes the ideology part. अब हम पीरियडाइजेशन कैसा करते हैं? एंशिएंट पीरियड, मिडिवल पीरियड एंड मॉडर्न पीरियड, यूरोप के बारे में. ओके, सो लेट अस फोकस ऑन दैट. नाउ व्हाट इज द peculiarity feature of the medieval Europe? बहुत सारी थी, लेकिन एक दी peculiarity हम कह सकते हैं. The church dominated every aspect of life in Europe. Okay, every aspect. Your private, your public, your social, your economic, your spiritual, your political life as well. Okay, so this was the peculiarity of the medieval era, yeah, Middle Age in Europe. Now, in the same European society or region, certain other processes also did take place. And we are going to take note of those processes. There is Renaissance, there is Reformation, and there is in 18th century Enlightenment. Okay, so on one hand, during medieval period, the overarching domination of and control of every walk of life by the church. Okay, and then we keep on saying that everything was understood during medieval period in Europe through the lens of the religion, through the lens of the Dharmaguru, through the lens of the church. Pope, yes. Pope used to tell them what is the reality. और वो बताते थे कि नीचे हेल है, ये अर्थ है, और ऊपर हेवन है. That was the otherworldly approach. Okay, religion. So make it simple. How did human being, again, let us keep in mind that we are talking about Europe. How did human being, human society during medieval period in Europe understand their existence? How did they understand their existence? उसका simple answer है, they understood the universe, they understood their social existence, human existence, as was informed them by the church, by the religion. Everything was made sense of through the lens of the religion. जो रिलीजन बताता था, जो चर्च बताता था, जो पोप बताते थे, वही को सच्चाई माना गया. ओके, अब जैसे हम as and when we enter from the medieval to the modern, the same function of understanding society, making sense of human existence, is done by another phenomena या another force. जो पहले काम रिलीजन ने किया था मिडिवल ईरा में, यानी कि हमारा एग्जिस्टेंस समझने का, उसको अंडरस्टैंड करने का, तो वही काम मॉडर्न पीरियड में दूसरा कोई फोर्स करने लगता है. तो वो फोर्स क्या है? दैट फोर्स इज आइडियोलॉजी. दैट फोर्स इज व्हाट? आइडियोलॉजी. जो रिलीजन ने काम किया, रिलीजन क्या काम करता था मिडिवल पीरियड में? यानी कि ये लाइफ जो है अर्थ वाला, वो कैसा है, वो क्यों है, दूसरा भी लाइफ है क्या, जिसको हम बोलते थे अदरवर्ल्डली. ओके, हेवन है, हेल है. तो ऑल दीज एस्पेक्ट्स वेर presented before us, told to us, informed to us by religion, by church, by the Pope. So this is a very important function that was performed by religion. But then we get to see in European history a revolt against church, a revolt against religion. And Machiavelli therefore becomes very, very important. So Machiavelli is that first political thinker in the galaxy of Western political thinker who advocates separation between state on one hand and the religion on the other hand. And he argued that society should be controlled. People should be controlled, not by church, not by Pope, not by Christianity, not by the religion. But Machiavelli argued the society should be controlled, people should be controlled. The collective life of the society should be controlled by the state. And there he writes his classic work, classic book, The Prince. And he advocates and justifies the princedom, that is the monarchy. So ideologies are, कल भी हमने कहा था कि ideologies are nothing but, or an ideology is a kind of a lens. वो चश्मा है, वो एक लेंस हमें प्रोवाइड करता है. सो लेंस से क्या करते हैं हम, या चश्मे से करते क्या है हम, we look at the reality. So ideologies are nothing but various ways of understanding, making sense. Understanding काफी है, understanding the reality. And reality का मतलब है social reality. We are not talking about reality pertaining one individual, but a collective life hour. अब उसमें past भी आता है, उसमें present भी आता है, और उसमें future भी आता है. Okay. अब how many ideologies do we have? We have liberalism, we have socialism, we have Marxism, we have fascism, we have Gandhism, and then we have feminism. So these political ideologies provide us various lenses of looking at our own existence. अगर आपने खाली एक illustration करते हैं, if you apply the lens of liberalism, then liberalism look at human being as a rational individual. Rational individual का मतलब है human being is an individual who can think freely and independently and who can act upon in order to protect and preserve one's own interest. यानी कि वो capable है. So the claim about individual, about human being, which is presented by liberalism, is claim of individual being capable, individual being rational, who does not require assistance of any other member या state का. हाँ, state का लगेगा assistance, लेकिन वो कौन से कॉन्टेक्स्ट में लगेगा स्टेट का असिस्टेंस, वही हम बाद में देखेंगे. लेकिन अदरवाइज एज इफ द इंडिविजुअल, दैट इज द ह्यूमन बीइंग डैश इंडिविजुअल फ्रॉम द लेंस ऑफ लिबरलिज्म या अकॉर्डिंग टू लिबरलिज्म इज अ सेल्फ मेड बीइंग, सेल्फ मेड, रैशनल, केपेबल. अब इसीलिए लिबरलिज्म क्या करता है, इफ यू आस्क लिबरलिज्म्स कॉन्सेप्शन ऑफ सोसाइटी, व्हाट काइंड ऑफ सोसाइटी डू यू वांट, इफ यू आस्क दैट टू एनी लिबरल, he would immediately answer, yeah, liberalism as an ideology immediately would answer free society. Free society का मतलब there shouldn't be any restrictions, no limitation, nothing. What kind of economy do you want? Again, answer would be same, free economy. Let the individual decide whatever to be done as part and parcel with. What kind of political system, what kind of state, what kind of government do we want? तो वो बोलेगा, पहला तो आंसर उसका होगा लिबरल का, accountable and responsible state. Accountable and responsible state, and as he rightly pointed out, limited state. John Locke, who is a very important scholar. Okay, so I guess this is more than sufficient. So the point is कि अब उसका थोड़ा सा समराइज भी हम कर सकते हैं कि मिडिवल पीरियड में रिलीजन ने जो काम किया है वो आज आइडियोलॉजी कर रही है. एंड आइडियोलॉजीज आर डिफरेंट लेंसेस ऑफ मेकिंग सेंस ऑफ एंड अंडरस्टैंडिंग रियलिटी. उसमें पास्ट आता है, प्रेजेंट आता है, फ्यूचर भी आता है. और वो ये भी हमें बताती है कि समाज में जो रिसोर्सेस है, सोसाइटी में जो रिसोर्सेस है, उसको कैसे डिस्ट्रीब्यूट करना चाहिए, उसके फॉर्मूले भी वो बताती है. लिबरलिज्म हैज द फॉर्मूला ऑफ फ्री मार्केट इकोनॉमी. सोशलिज्म हैज द फॉर्मूला ऑफ प्रोड्यूसिंग, डिस्ट्रीब्यूटिंग रिसोर्सेस through collective ownership by the public authority, and in most of the cases it is the state. Okay, And if you ask the same question to Gandhism as an ideology, ki what do you think about distribution of resources in society? The Gandhism also talk about equality, equitable distribution of resources in a very general sense. But how should we go about doing that? कैसे करेंगे उसको? तो उन्होंने ट्रस्टीशिप, अभी तो मैं फिलहाल एक ही आइडिया आपको बताऊं, ट्रस्टीशिप की कॉन्सेप्ट उन्होंने गांधी ने बताई थी, वो हम बाद में डिस्कस करेंगे. सो आई होप दिस इज मोर देन. नाउ दिस इज द लास्ट वन. ओके, as far as the section A of paper 1 is concerned, political theory. So political theory is nothing but, again I am saying, going to say the same thing. It is a kind of repetition. Political theory is nothing but understanding political phenomena, anything which is political, okay, in a very systematic manner, in a disciplined manner, in an objective manner, in a scientific manner, even we can, but systematic is the appropriate word. Understanding political affair, political matter, political development, anything political, any political phenomena as systematically as possible. And in order to ensure that, we have to keep aside our prejudices, we have to keep aside our personal preferences या individual preferences. तभी जाके theory बनती है. Otherwise theory बनना, theory produce करना, generate करना काफी मुश्किल काम है. Okay, so I think this is more than sufficient. Now, what I am going to do is to complete the discussion of even the syllabus of section B as well. Okay, उसको भी खत्म करते हैं, because then we'll get started with the first chapter. Indian government and politics. Now, this is the second section from paper 1. The section A is theory and section B is the IGP. Okay, now political theory provides us a broad framework, okay, as to how to understand, make sense of and analyze political life. और उसमें हम कंक्लूडिंग तरीके से ऐसे भी बोल सकते हैं ना कि उसमें क्या आने वाला है. तो वी आर गोइंग टू गेट टू नो अबाउट टू forces, let us say. So one is the state and the second one is the society. Definitely हम कह सकते हैं ना. So political science as a subject studies the interaction between, can we say this, interaction between state and society. बिल्कुल है वो. Okay, जब हम कहते हैं कि political science studies the political dimension of that public affairs in a society, so who handles, who manages, who administers, who governs the public affairs, तो हमें बताना पड़ता है state करता है. Okay, so political science is nothing but study of state society interaction. So that interaction, that exchange is very, very important. Now we will study this in section A of paper 1 from a deeply theoretical perspective, through so many ideas, through so many political ideologies, through so many theories, and importantly from the lens of the Western political thinker as well as the Indian political thinker, including ancient as well as the modern. अब B में क्या करने वाले हैं? If IGP is the section B of paper 1, what are we going to do with that? So we will keep in mind all our theoretical understanding that we are going to gain by discussing section A as a backdrop, as a background. यानी कि पीछे हमारे वही रहना चाहिए. And then we will especially focus on a specific society called as Indian society. And then therefore the title is Indian government and politics. अब Indian government and politics में भी हम यही पढ़ने वाले हैं. क्या पढ़ने वाले हैं? Indian state on one hand and the Indian society on the other hand. Okay, now let us make it simple. पहला है the historical background उसको थोड़ा रीअरेंज हम करते हैं, उसी सिलेबस को रीअरेंज कर रहे हैं. हिस्टोरिकल बैकग्राउंड ऑफ इंडियन कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन. कैन वी से दिस? यस. ओके, and I'm going to elaborate upon this aspect, historical background of Indian constitution. Okay, now even in this segment, if we are going to take note of state society relationship, तो उसमें एक prefix लगाना पड़ेगा, Indian state and Indian society. We know for sure. Now, if we want to understand what kind of state we had and we have, okay, modern period. So as far as had is concerned, we had colonial state, we had foreign colonial state, and then 47 onwards, we have been having what kind of state? Our own state. That is the independence. इतना simple हम उसको कर सकते हैं. Okay, ठीक है. अब उसी को समझने के लिए we have to well start with the historical underpinnings of the construction of modern Indian state. What kind of state? Modern Indian state. Now, even in India, state did exist during ancient period, during medieval period. And the last empire, last emperor, let us say, so empire was that of the Mughal Empire. And the last major hum bol rahe, emperor was Aurangzeb. So he dies in 1707, and that gives an impetus to the decline of the Mughal Empire. So 18th century witnesses in India rise of so many regional powers. And at the same time, so many European trading companies had made inroads into India for the purpose of trade. But then we know for sure, given the fragmentation that we had as a society, they were very clever enough to understand that the internal strife within the society, and then subsequently they fought against the regional powers from India, and they also fought against the other competitors, that is the other European trading companies. And that is how British East India Company emerged as the ruling company, यानी कि ruling dispensation करके वो आता है. Okay, so colonial state आता है, colonial regime वहां पे आती है. There is no doubt about it. Now, if we want to understand the historical background of Indian state and Indian constitution, then we have to study colonialism. Okay, we have, so let us make it simple, saying of around 200 years, okay, ऐसे हम बोलते हैं उसको. 18th century, 19th century and mid 20th century वो ज्यादा होता है, लेकिन 1765 is a landmark year for the establishment of the rule of the British East India Company in India. 1765, थोड़ा उसको 1750 बोलते हैं. Okay, so 1750 to 1947, थोड़ा हिसाब के लिए हम बोलेंगे कि 200 years. Okay, now as far as the 200 years of colonial period is concerned, initially we had company rule and then we had the British crown rule, यानी कि crown rule. ये भी technical details हमें पता है. Now, as far as our syllabus is concerned, there are 2 chapters from this period, from this very first section of the syllabus. So one is the political strategies of Indian freedom struggle, and the other is the making of Indian constitution, legacies, and so on and so forth. उसके detail में नहीं जाते. I am going to broadly focus on 2 headings. Okay, now you are going to study all these elements of the 2 chapters even in GS1 as part of modern Indian history, as part of India's struggle for independence. But there you would be studying all these developments as student of GS. But here you are supposed to understand all these developments not as student of GS, but primarily as a student of optional, the discipline, the subject called as Pol Science. तो ऐसा होता है क्या कि 1857 का मतलब GS1 में अलग है और 1857 का मतलब Pol Science में अलग है. मतलब एक ही है. However, as student of Pol Science, as a student of optional, we have to go deeper. Okay, now in history, as part of GS1, we will have to take note of so many dimensions. कब हुआ, क्यों हुआ, उसका impact क्या हुआ, so on and so forth. So every important factual detail has to be part and parcel of what? The study of modern Indian history as part of GS1. Okay, but here in Pol Science, वो factual details हमारे लिए important होंगे, लेकिन सबसे ज्यादा कोई तो चीज important होने वाली है. वो क्या है? We will adopt this frame. So did we have state in those 200 years? Yes, we did have state. But what kind of state was that? It was not our state. It was a colonial state. Okay, तो उसके बारे में हमें पढ़ाई करनी पड़ेगी. Colonial state and society. We were Indian society, but were we aware of being one society? We were not aware of that. Okay, so thus, primarily, we will have to, as part and parcel of understanding the relationship between state and society, the colonial state, and a very fragmented and divided Indian society of 18th century as well as the 19th century. Uski padhai karni padegi. Okay, that is one thing. The second thing, as part of that, slowly and steadily, now 1857 revolt is a very landmark development as far as rise of nationalism in India is concerned. Okay, so now what is nationalism? Nationalism is nothing but feeling of oneness with the aspiration of independent खुद का political existence. So as and when nationalism emerged here, उसका मतलब ये हुआ कि we had become aware of the fact that we are ruled by, we are governed by a foreign power. And it was not just simply a foreign power, it was a colonial power. Okay, और colonial का peculiarity क्या होता है? The colonial power primarily and fundamentally was interested in extracting and exploiting. So extracting resources and exploiting the economy and the society. So it was deeply exploitative in character. So हमें समझ आई ये ऐसा वाला regime है यहाँ पे, ये इस टाइप का स्टेट काम कर रहा है, so on and so forth. And then so many factors. Railway contributed to that, modern ideas contributed to the feeling of, that is the rise of nationalism, work of so many leaders like Raja Ram Mohan Rai and so many others, organizations, so on and so forth. And thus, a very important transformation begins in Indian society. Okay, और यहाँ पे हम आते हैं फिर 1885 की घटना की तरफ, that is the establishment of the INC, that is the Indian National Congress. And then typically we study the moderate phase, then the extremist phase, and then the Gandhian phase. But we should never forget contribution of all other movements, sections of society, and so many leaders and organizations. We had the revolt of peasants and Adivasis, movement of women, revolutionary movement in so many phases. Then importantly, the working class movement. Okay, so number of movements also contributed. Movements, agitations, organizations, leaders, and ideas. Besides the mainstream National Congress and the mainstream national movement. So usko ikhatta hame karna hai. Now, moderate, extremist, and Gandhian phase. Now, you are going to study all these phases and other movements and organizations even as part of GS1, that is modern Indian history. But we as students of Pol Science are going to specifically focus on moderate phase, extremist phase, and Gandhian phase by keeping in mind this framework. Now, the moderate phase, for example, how did moderate phase respond to the colonial state? So moderates thought that, and Ranade especially, M.G. Ranade, okay, he argued that, and that was a sort of a very convinced kind of argument by him. He thought that the British regime here was a divine dispensation because they were progressive people. They back there in England and Britain, okay, they had democracy, accountable and responsible government. There was rule of law. There was the value of the individuality of the human being, liberty, equality, so on and so forth. So Ranade and so many other moderates were deeply impressed by and deeply influenced by the modern outlook, modern ideas, and modern kind of governmental experiment back in Europe in general and Britain particularly. So their response to colonial state was not at all critical, but it was very sort of a positive, and the colonial state, as if was to make it very simple, was in their good books. Okay, that is one thing. Second thing, because they thought that colonial state must stay here for some time to come, and during that period, we can transform our backward, feudal, and medieval kind of society. And that is how in moderate phase during the entire 19th century, but in the second part of the 19th century, social reforms and religious reforms become very prominent. That is something which was focused by the moderates. Okay, now reform was something which has to be understood here. The reforms were not about the state, but reforms were essentially about our own people, about our own society. So we introspected, we started that introspection and realized that our society is backward, our society is still under so many superstitions and so on and so forth. We need to transform our society. Now, this reform process also was important in order to transform our fragmented, divided society into a modern one and thereby generate something called as nationalism. So that reform process also contributed a lot as far as the emergence, the rise of nationalism is concerned. So ये moderates का तरीका. And the last one from the moderate perspective, what strategies were adopted by them to interface with the state and to approach the society, but especially the colonial state. The strategy was that of constitutionalism. So they say, let us write applications to them. Let us petition the colonial state and get certain concessions. So that is the brief story of the moderates. So what did we do here? We focus on the colonial state, the then Indian society, and the manner in which moderates responded to the colonial state, and the manner in which they approach Indian society. Now the extremist. Extremists takes a very different posture about the colonial regime. And they argue that this colonial regime is deeply exploitative, it is degenerative, and it has led to degeneration of even the Indian society. So therefore, instead of being supportive of the colonial regime, we must urgently look for freeing ourselves from the colonial regime. Okay, so first point, extremists acquires a critical posture, critical position about the colonial state. Number one, बहुत ही critical है. दूसरा, their goals change, and it is something generally known as the Chatusutri. है ना, 4 formulas are. So one is Swaraj. Now Swaraj becomes the goal of the extremist phase. दूसरा है boycott. Let us boycott everything which is foreign, right from आपके कपड़े, educational institutions, everything which is foreign was to be boycotted. But then comes the third thing from the second one, that is the Swadeshi. Because we were going to require goods and commodities, so उसका क्या करेंगे? अगर हम foreign goods पे boycott करते हैं, उसका boycott करते हैं, तो लगने तो वाला है, तो Swadeshi. And then comes a very important element of the Chatusutri, that is a national education. So this is the strategy. Chatusutri is sort of a strategy adopted by the extremist. Okay. So number 2. Number 3, what was their view about Indian society? What did they think about Indian society? Were they equally critical about the Indian society? They were not critical. Rather, I'm putting it in a very generic sense. There are certain exceptions, but in a general sense, what extremists thought about the social and religious reform in Indian society was this. Look, now we should prioritize the political reforms. We should gain independence. We should achieve Swaraj. And then once we become independent, we can reinitiate once again the process of reforming our society. So it was the position of the extremists, especially led by Tilak, who prioritized the political reforms over the social reforms. Okay, and there it was a kind of polemic argument against the British, against the colonial government. You have no right, that was the argument, you have no right to interfere in the internal matters of the Indian society. Who the hell you are, sort of. You do not have any right to interfere with the traditions, Indian traditions, and so on and so forth. अब एक सवाल दोनों फेजेस को हम पूछते हैं. Nationalism. So nationalism is going to be a central idea that we are going to focus on as student of pol science, because nationalism helps us in making sense of the kind of society we were evolving and the manner in which we were responding to the colonial state. अब moderate phase में nationalism क्या type का था? What kind of nationalism did the moderate preach? Were they nationalist? Oh, absolutely, they were nationalist. Okay, but what kind of nationalism did they preach? तो उनके नाम से ही पता चलता है. तो मॉडरेट नेशनलिज्म था. लेकिन देयर इज अनदर अप्रोप्रिएट वर्ड टू डिस्क्राइब देयर नेशनल, लिबरल नेशनलिज्म. They were quite open-minded, they were quite liberal, and because they were liberal, they adopted a very critical outlook about one's own society. Therefore, they prioritized the social and religious reform. They were deeply critical of ourselves. They were deeply critical of our society. Child marriage, sati, and so on and so forth, we know for sure. Okay, so their nationalism was liberal, their nationalism was moderate, their nationalism was sort of secular in character. Okay, moderate nationalism. But the moment we turn to the extremist phase, as far as the Congress is concerned, INC is concerned, the nationalism, the kind of nationalism the extremists preach is known generally as cultural nationalism. What kind of nationalism is? It is cultural nationalism. But किसका culture, कौन सा culture? It was invariably the Hindu culture. Now Tilak famously is known for introducing the Ganesh Utsav and the Shiva Jayanti Utsav. Now the purpose was very legitimate. The purpose was, in Marathi it is called as Loka Sangraha. Okay, मतलब क्या है? To mobilize people, because we needed nationalism as a driving force to mobilize people, give them the awareness that this is a colonial regime and we need to gather together, mobilize ourselves, resist the colonial regime and become free and independent as early as possible. उसके लिए तो आपको इकट्ठा आना पड़ेगा ना. So Ganesh and Shiva Jayanti Utsav were introduced by Tilak, and he supported that in order to mobilize the people, take the message of the National Congress to the masses. ये उनका उसके पीछे लॉजिक था. But we can't deny the fact that Shiva Jayanti Utsav and Ganesh Utsav were and continue to be part and parcel of the Hindu tradition. दूसरा, Aurobindo, anyway we have Aurobindo as one of the modern Indian political thinkers. Sri Aurobindo जो योगी बनते हैं बाद में, Sri Aurobindo and Yogi Aurobindo. Now, Sri Aurobindo gets back to Vedanta to propound and present his idea of nationalism. And Aurobindo's nationalism is known as spiritual nationalism, okay, which is rooted in the Vedanta philosophy. We will discuss about that later on, but let me be very brief here. Now, Aurobindo argued, अब वेदांत कहाँ से आता है? Vedanta is not part of Islam, not Buddhism, not Jainism. Vedanta essentially जो हिंदू से ज्यादा ताल्लुक रखता है. अब उन्होंने उसमें चेंज भी किया अरविंदो ने, वो बाद में हम देखेंगे. He interprets Vedanta very creatively, and Aurobindo was deeply influenced by Vivekananda as well. Okay, we'll see all these details later on. So now Aurobindo argued, so Aurobindo's nationalism was spiritual nationalism, and the something which is spiritual, the idea of spiritual comes from, in Aurobindo's nationalism comes from directly the Vedanta. Okay, and there is this idea that he propounded, he adopted and constructed his political thought. All this is Brahma. What is that idea? All this is Brahma. मतलब मराठीमध्ये हे सगळं ब्रह्ममय आहे. That's a very, so हे सगळं ब्रह्ममय आहे. And what is Brahma? Brahma is the idea behind idea, है ना, कि गवर्निंग प्रिंसिपल है, वो यूनिवर्सल प्रिंसिपल है. ओके, जैसे प्लेटो बताते हैं, देयर इज समथिंग कॉल्ड एज आइडिया, देयर इज समथिंग कॉल्ड एज द फॉर्म. सो प्लेटो इज नोन फॉर conceiving two worlds, presenting two worlds. One is the world of ideas and the other is the world of reality. ऐसे दो वर्ल्ड उन्होंने इमेजिन किए थे, सॉरी दो वर्ल्ड बताए थे, सॉरी नॉट इमेजिन, बताए थे. So one was the world of reality की जो exist करता था या करता है, and the other world that Plato imagined of, वहां उन्होंने imagine किया था, that was the world of ideas. Okay, और प्लेटो के हिसाब से the world of ideas, the world of forms was real or capital, and the actual real world for Plato was a secondary thing. Why? How? We will look into that. Now, Aurobindo, by getting back to the idea called as all this is Brahma, looks at Brahma, interprets Brahma as the absolute idea. Idea behind idea, the ultimate idea which is regulating and governing this universe. पहला. दूसरा उनका कहना था, हम सब में, if all this is governed by the Brahma, the principle Brahma, the universal principle, the absolute principle, supreme principle, उनका दूसरा आर्गुमेंट उतना ही इंपॉर्टेंट है. All of us, each one of us, every single individual in India, वो इंडिया के बारे में बात कर रहे थे, does possess, each one of us does possess an element of Brahma. हम सब में क्या है? उस ब्रह्म का एक एलिमेंट है. ओके, उससे वो आइडिया कंस्ट्रक्ट करते, उसको बाद में हम देखेंगे. सो वेदांत. अब दूसरा है स्पिरिचुअल नेशनलिज्म. स्पिरिचुअल नेशनलिज्म, he defines spiritualism by using that idea, all this is Brahma, and all of us, each one of us does possess an element of Brahma. उसको यही पे छोड़ देते हैं. Don't worry about that. We'll get back to that later on. Now, also Aurobindo argues that nationalism is dharma. उन्होंने कहा है, what is nationalism? Nationalism is dharma. What is mean by that? Not dharma as Hindu or other dharma, but dharma, sorry, nationalism as dharma, nationalism being dharma for Aurobindo was duty. Okay, each one of us are duty bound to be a nationalist and to participate in the national movement. So let us conclude the thing. Thus, the extremist notion of nationalism was cultural in character, and the resources that Tilak on one hand, Aurobindo on the other hand, being part and parcel of the extremist phase of nationalism, the resources they were using, they were from Indian Hindu past. Okay, and therefore so many scholars have argued that minorities sort of isolated themselves during the extremist phase. तो ये स्टूडेंट ऑफ पॉल साइंस करके हमें एक्सट्रीमिस्ट की तरफ ऐसे देखना है, क्या टाइप का नेशनलिज्म है. नाउ टू कट इट शॉर्ट एंड कंक्लूड द डिस्कशन, द मोमेंट वी टर्न टू द गांधीयन फेज, गांधी very creatively combines the best of moderates and the best of extremists. How does he do that? Now, did Gandhian phase resist the colonial regime? Resist किया या नहीं किया गांधी ने? बिल्कुल किया. He launched non-cooperation, then civil disobedience, और चले जाओ का तो नारा कितना फेमस था वो. Okay, he fought for that. So there is no doubt. So, like the extremist, he chose the strategy to resist, to oppose, और उनको भगा दीजिए यहाँ पे. इतना explicitly उन्होंने कहा है. There is no, यानी कि fighting for India's freedom, no doubt about that. So वो एक है. So the resistance to colonial regime, that Gandhian phase is known for, that was not a simple resistance. It was very effective and it was very, very forceful. Okay. So ये extremist का हम element definitely कह सकते हैं. But what strategy, what tool, what method did Gandhi employ to vehemently resist the colonial regime? We know the answer. It was non-violence. Non-violent ही था ना वो, यानी कि peaceful था, वो non-violent था. It is something which is part and parcel of the moderate element, या strategy of the moderate element. ऐसे वो combine करते हैं. Okay, but moderates were known for constitutionalism, and Gandhian movement was not known for constitutionalism, because we know for sure civil disobedience. What is civil disobedience? Was Gandhi asking us to obey the law of the colonial regime? Not at all. He was rather appealing us to disobey the law, but with a code of conduct in a civil manner, because he was committed to the method of non-violence. Okay, and thus Gandhi convert sort of, let us say, या during Gandhian phase Indian national movement converts into a mass movement. Okay, तो ये जो है ना उसकी तरफ हमें इस चैप्टर में देखना है. This is one part. Now the second one, whatever happens from 1765, the remaining part of 18th century, importantly the entire 19th century and till 1947, इसको हम बोलते हैं national movement. Broadly, very broadly, I'm not differentiating between the two. Okay, so national movement, India's struggle for independence, so on and so forth. अब सेकंड चैप्टर आप पढ़ोगे ना, सेकंड चैप्टर इसमें थोड़ा सा सॉरी सेकंड चैप्टर नहीं, बी पढ़ोगे, पहला चैप्टर का बी पढ़ोगे आप, तो उसमें क्या है देखिए, पर्सपेक्टिव्स ऑन इंडियन नेशनल मूवमेंट. सो वी हैड नेशनल मूवमेंट. ओके, आवर नेशनल मूवमेंट फॉट फॉर द इंडिपेंडेंस, बट उसकी तरफ देखने के अलग अलग चश्मे हैं, अलग अलग पर्सपेक्टिव्स है. एंड अब देखिए कितने मेंशन किए हैं, लिबरल पर्सपेक्टिव, then the socialist perspective, the Marxist perspective, the radical humanist, and the Dalit perspective. So these are the different perspectives of looking at Indian national movement. जो भी हुआ उन 200 साल के दौरान या पीरियड में, तो उसकी तरफ देखने के अलग अलग नजरिए हैं. लिबरल्स अलग तरीके से देखते हैं, मॉडरेट्स लिबरल जो थे इसेंशियली दे वर द मॉडरेट्स. अब सोशलिस्ट लाइक एन नेहरू, then JP, Jayaprakash Narayan, okay, so many others. Okay, so they had a particular take on about the national movement. Up Marxists, they were very critical, and M.N. Roy was the leading light of the Marxist perspective on Indian national movement. वो सब हम देखेंगे. So Indian national movement cannot be understood by one chasma या one perspective. We have to take note of all the prominent perspectives, because each perspective emphasizes on some important dimension of the national movement, and therefore every perspective is going to help us in making better sense of the exact nature, or what to say, the multi-dimensional, multifaceted nature of the national movement. अब ये दूसरा जो चैप्टर, हाँ ये यहाँ खत्म होता है. पहला मैंने क्या लिखा था, हिस्टोरिकल बैकग्राउंड, यानी कि colonial state on one hand and the society as we existed during those 200 years, the interaction is that what we are going to discuss. तो वो पहला हुआ. अब ये जो मेकिंग ऑफ इंडियन कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन का, उसको भी उसमें ही लेते हैं कि अगेन वी हैव टू स्टडी द colonial regime, different acts which were enacted during colonial regime, then the demands that we were making, okay, the strategies that we were adopting, and then finally it is through the cabinet mission plan that constituent assembly is established. Okay, so 46 में होता है, and then the work of constituent assembly begins at the fag end of 1946. It works around for 3 years, and the constitution is produced. We adopt that on 26th of November 49, and we implement constitution from 26th of January 50. वहां से हम करते हैं. अब यहां से वो दूसरा बहुत ही इंपॉर्टेंट चैप्टर शुरू होता है. तो वो क्या है और उसकी तरफ कैसे देखना है. यस, अब मैं खाली एक को टिक मार्क करता हूं, वो तो हमने डिस्कस किया है. अब दूसरा क्या है, इंडियन कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन. बहुत ही ऑब्वियस एंड एक्सप्लिसिट. दिस इज नॉट जस्ट अ चैप्टर, दिस इज अ सेक्शन. So we are rearranging the syllabus. Okay, now what are we going to do as far as understanding Constitution of India is concerned? तो हम उसमें क्या करेंगे? So the kind of state the Indian Constitution has created. So state के बारे में हम पढ़ने वाले हैं या पढ़ाई करने वाले हैं. When we say state, then invariably उसके दो आंसर्स है. So we have parliamentary democracy, okay, what form of government do we have? उसका एक आंसर है parliamentary form of government. But since the form of government that we have adopted through constitution is democratic, it becomes what? Parliamentary democracy. So parliamentary form of government, parliamentary form of democracy. Okay, so parliamentary democracy. दूसरा आंसर क्या हम देते हैं? फेडरलिज्म. ओके, एंड उस दोनों को मिला के, इसको मिला के ये हम पढ़ाई करने वाले हैं, सेपरेशन ऑफ पावर्स, उसको बॉक्स ही करते हैं। ओके, so when we say as student of Pol Science we are going to study constitution at length, okay, but what are we going to focus on as part and parcel of making sense of Constitution of India, studying Constitution of India? तो क्या टाइप का स्टेट है? सो वन इज द पार्लियामेंट्री, अदर इज द फेडरल। उसको ही अलग सी भाषा में हम कह सकते हैं सेपरेशन ऑफ पावर्स। ओके, अब उसके तीन पहलू है जो हमें स्पेसिफिकली फोकस करने हैं। सो वन इज व्हाट? द सेपरेशन ऑफ पावर बिटवीन थ्री ब्रांचेस ऑफ गवर्नमेंट। ये सिंपल सी बात है, हम सबको पता है कि इसका पहला पहलू है द सेपरेशन बिटवीन लेजिस्लेचर, एग्जीक्यूटिव एंड जुडिशियरी। ओके, एंड दिस इज पार्ट ऑफ पार्लियामेंट्री सिस्टम या पार्लियामेंट्री फॉर्म ऑफ गवर्नमेंट। ओके, सो इन पार्लियामेंट्री फॉर्म ऑफ गवर्नमेंट वी हैव थ्री ब्रांचेस, लेजिस्लेचर, एग्जीक्यूटिव एंड जुडिशियरी। अब उसके डिटेल में अभी तो फिलहाल नहीं जाते हैं। सो थ्री ब्रांचेस आर प्रोवाइडेड फॉर, three branches are allocated the function respectively of making laws, framing policies and implementation, and adjudicating the matter. And this is called as what kind of separation of power? Horizontal. ये क्या टाइप का सेपरेशन ऑफ पावर है? हॉरिजॉन्टल, यानी कि तीनों ब्रांचेस एक ही लेवल पे हमने बिठाई है। ऐसा नहीं कि ये इधर है, ये इधर है, ये इधर है। हॉरिजॉन्टल at the same level. So this is one aspect of the Indian scheme of separation of power. दूसरा क्या है? दूसरा इधर लिखते हैं, थोड़ा सा स्पेस कम पड़ेगा। दूसरा क्या है? वर्टिकल सेपरेशन ऑफ पावर। ओके, वर्टिकल सेपरेशन ऑफ पावर, उसमें क्या क्या करेंगे हम? लेवल्स है, पहला यूनियन, दूसरा है स्टेट, और तीसरा है, मैं खाली एक ही वर्ड लिखता हूं, एल, यानी कि लोकल सेल गवर्नमेंट। Initially, we had only union government and the state government, but with 73rd and 74th amendment, we have ये vertical separation of power है, जिसको पॉल साइंस की लैंग्वेज में डिवीजन ऑफ पावर बताया जाता है। इट इज नोन एज डिवीजन ऑफ पावर, बट इट इज वर्टिकल सेपरेशन ऑफ पावर। सो ये दूसरा एस्पेक्ट है। अब उसमें तो हम ज्यादा पढ़ाई करेंगे। सो दिस इज बेसिकली फेडरलिज्म। दिस इज बेसिकली फेडरलिज्म। Federalism is a power sharing arrangement wherein at least two levels of government are created by constitution, and it is through constitution itself that power is divided between the union level on one hand and the state level on the other hand, and subsequently the local cell bodies. That is fine. So this is vertical. अब उसके डिटेल्स में तो हम जा सकते हैं कि if we read and study the separation of, the sharing of power arrangement, we have seventh schedule. We have three lists, union, state, and the concurrent list. Then we'll come to know, already we know that, you know that, our union government is very dominant. Our union government is very strong. So then एक सवाल आएगा कि why is it that Indian Constitution has adopted a model of federalism which is known for dominant union? वो भी हम पढ़ाई करेंगे कि क्यों ऐसा हुआ है। What factors were responsible for making the union level government so strong? Partition had taken place, communal riots, assimilation of around 550 princely states, so and so forth. So many factors influenced the constitution makers and the process of making of constitution, which as a result of that we ended up with dominant union. ये दूसरा पहलू हुआ। अब आपको सरप्राइजिंग लगेगा कि इंडियन कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन में इंडियन स्टेट ऑर्गेनाइजेशन जिस तरीके से हमने किया है, वन इज द पार्लियामेंट्री हॉरिजॉन्टल सेपरेशन ऑफ पावर, द सेकंड इज द वर्टिकल एज पार्ट ऑफ फेडरलिज्म, देयर इज थर्ड एस्पेक्ट ऑफ दैट। एंड व्हाट इज दैट थर्ड एस्पेक्ट, जिसको हम ऐसे पहचानते हैं, इंडिपेंडेंट कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल बॉडीज। इंडिपेंडेंट कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल बॉडीज, उसमें एग्जांपल्स क्या है? सबसे पहला एग्जांपल क्या आएगा? ईसी आएगा, इलेक्शन कमीशन आएगा। देन दूसरा आएगा कैग, तीसरा आएगा एफसी, चौथा आएगा, बाकी भी आ सकते हैं लेकिन हम यूपीएससी भी लिखते हैं उसमें. ओके, सो एन एंड सो फोर्थ. नाउ दिस इज क्वाइट इंटरेस्टिंग. दिस इज क्वाइट इंटरेस्टिंग. अगर हम उस बॉक्स को, if we look at it as one site of power, no doubt there are three branches, but let us call it as one site of power. यहां दूसरा साइट है, यहां पार्लियामेंट्री है, यहां फेडरल है, यहां सेपरेशन ऑफ पावर है, यहां डिवीजन ऑफ पावर है, यहां हॉरिजॉन्टल है, यहां वर्टिकल है. सो वन साइड, द सेकंड साइड, एंड वी हैव गॉट द थर्ड साइट, जिसमें भी प्लूरल ईसी है, कैग है, एफसी है, फाइनेंस कमीशन है, यूपीएससी है, सो एन एंड सो फोर्थ. These are independent constitutional bodies. सबसे इंपॉर्टेंट ऐसा किसी दूसरी कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल बॉडी का स्टेटस नहीं है, एंड दैट इज दिस वन, इलेक्शन कमीशन. इलेक्शन कमीशन is given constitutional authority to hold elections in free and fair atmosphere, and no branch of government can dictate terms to the EC. This is what Constitution has provided for, and this is the spirit of the Constitution of India. So Election Commission constitutionally it is made so autonomous. But in recent past, certain aspects of Election Commission have been tweaked. For example, the procedure of appointing chief election commissioners, उसमें changes हमने किए हैं. Or those changes are done by the union government to suit their interest. नहीं तो सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने, चंद्रचूड़ यहाँ के ही थे, दूसरे चंद्रचूड़, वो सीनियर वाले नहीं. ओके, वाई चंद्रचूड़. ओके, रिटायर होने के पहले ये एक उनका प्रोमिनेंट जजमेंट था. सॉरी, थोड़ा पहले उसके, थोड़े इमीडिएटली जब आए थे वो, व्हेन ही बिकेम चीफ जस्टिस. तो जजमेंट क्या था? ही सजेस्टेड अ कमिटी टू अपॉइंट द इलेक्शन कमीशन, जिस कमिटी में PM was going to be one member. The second was going to be, and still is, that is the LOP, leader of opposition. And the third name member suggested by the Supreme Court was the Chief Justice of India. अब वो तीसरा been done away with, because immediately union government, that is through parliament, amended the constitution. और उन्होंने बदलाव किया है. So, but if we read the original provision, if we read the spirit of Indian Constitution as far as Election Commission is concerned, Election Commission has been conferred an autonomous position. But उसमें बाद में बदलाव किए हैं. Okay. So अब उसके बारे में डिटेल में बाद में बात करते हैं. और दूसरी चीज थोड़ा आपको डिविएट लगेगा, लेकिन दिस इज वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट. While reading Constitution, the state with two aspects, facets, and the scheme of separation of power, one side, second side, the third side. अब उसमें हम, अब ये GS में नहीं करते, ये ऑप्शनल में करना पड़ेगा हमें. तो we have to take note of important scholarly opinions and analysis of all these aspects of the Constitution of India. और यहाँ पे इसके बारे में माधव खोसला, okay, and I'm going to follow a practice of showing the books. ऐसे बहुत सारे 25-30 किताबें होने वाली है. दैट इज व्हाट आई एम डूइंग इन GS लेक्चर्स एज वेल. आपको याद रहेगा कि हाँ, ये कवर हमने देखा था, ये किताब का नाम था. सो माधव खोसला हैज रिटन अ वेरी इंटरेस्टिंग बुक ऑन कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन ऑफ इंडिया, इंडियाज फाउंडिंग मोमेंट. क्या नाम है किताब का? इंडियाज फाउंडिंग मोमेंट. सो हाउ डज माधव खोसला, वन ऑफ व्हाट वेरी क्वाइट यंग एंड एनर्जेटिक स्कॉलर ऑफ इंडियन कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन, तो उन्होंने इंडियाज फाउंडिंग मोमेंट नाम का किताब लिखा है, और उसमें उन्होंने इसके बारे में आर्ग्यू किया है. तो खोसला आर्ग्यूज दैट टिपिकली अदर डेमोक्रेटिक कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन इन वर्ल्ड हैव these aspects as part of separation of power. But what is the uniqueness of Indian Constitution and the separation of power, scheme of separation of power in Constitution of India is this one. Okay. अब उसका थोड़ा डिटेल देखते हैं. And I'll narrate something which had taken place in earlier past. In 2002, Godhra had happened, and the aftermath of Godhra in Gujarat. So communal riots and so on and so forth. And those riots were one-sided, undoubtedly. Okay. The assembly, Gujarat assembly, was immediately abolished. Okay. and BJP was the ruling party there. Today's Prime Minister was then Chief Minister of Gujarat. And at the same time, BJP was in power as an NDA led by Prime Minister, Honorable Prime Minister Vajpayee. एक ही पार्टी की सत्ता दोनों जगह थी. And what BJP Gujarat wanted under the leadership of PM Modi, now PM Modi, then CM Modi, अब वो नहीं रहते, डिसॉल्व किया था ना. आप देखिए, once you dissolve the assembly, then you have to hold elections and constitute the assembly. उसके बीच में 6 महीने से ज्यादा आप अंतर नहीं रख सकते हो. So once you dissolve the assembly, then it becomes essential to hold elections as early as possible. 6 महीने से ज्यादा आप उसको रुका नहीं सकते हैं. और उनका क्या अंडरस्टैंडिंग था वो हम पता, यानी कि वी कैन अंडरस्टैंड दैट. बट द इलेक्शन कमीशन, Chief Election Commissioner, argued that no, even if there is a constitutional provision which binds us to hold elections so that the parameter of 6 months is not violated. उन्होंने कहा कि उसी कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन ने हमें अधिकार दिया है. The same constitution has given us a mandate to hold election in free and fair atmosphere. And they argued then that we are going to visit Gujarat. We will see and confirm whether the conditions in Gujarat are free and fair. Therefore, the schedule was postponed. आप सोच सकते हो कि ऐसा भी इलेक्शन कमीशन था हमारे यहाँ पे. खाली गुजरात में बीजेपी नहीं था सत्ता में, केंद्र में भी बीजेपी था. Even though it was a coalition government, that was the level to which election commission had gone, can go. It can assert its autonomy. I hope you got it. हाँ, वो बीजेपी था इसलिए हमें अच्छा लग रहा है, ऐसा कोई नहीं. कोई भी पार्टी हो, this is a constitutional body. This is a constitutional body. And you must have read about Mr. T.N. Seshan. He was a very assertive kind of chief election commissioner, and he introduced so many very important changes in the electoral process. वो आई कार्ड है ना, हमारा आई कार्ड, तो उन्होंने इंट्रोड्यूस किया था. देन कोड ऑफ कंडक्ट. ओके, कोड ऑफ कंडक्ट एज एन आइडिया एंड इम्प्लीमेंटेशन ऑफ दैट आइडिया. अब रिसेंट पास में इतना कुछ हुआ है कि हमें लगेगा क्या कोड ऑफ कंडक्ट की सर बात कर रहे, कोई भी उसको फॉलो नहीं करता है. आप रिसेंट पास में बहुत सारी चीजें बदली है, लेकिन इन दोज डेज इलेक्शन कमीशन वाज क्वाइट assertive, and there were fantastic election commissioners very committed to the constitution, and they did not bow down the pressure of any ruling party. कोई नहीं, they were committed to the spirit of the constitution. तो इसीलिए वो इंपॉर्टेंट होता है. अब दूसरा देखिए, कैग का पोजीशन अलग है, इलेक्शन कमीशन से अलग है. अब कैग किसके अंडर काम करता है? कैन वी प्लेस कैग इन दिस स्कीम ऑफ सेपरेशन ऑफ पावर? थोड़ा सोच के बताइए मुझे. कैग को किस टाइप का बॉडी बताया जाता है? कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल है, लेकिन वो करता क्या है? तो वो ऑडिट करता है. ओके, अब देखिए, माना तो यह जाता है कि वो इट वर्क्स अंडर द एग्जीक्यूटिव. ओके, ब्रॉडली, वेरी ब्रॉडली, बट audits the reports, prepares a report and submits it to the obviously president, which is to be tabled in the parliament. इसीलिए वो किसको फायदेमंद होता है? तो पार्लियामेंट को, यानी कि लेजिस्लेचर को. Once the report is tabled, okay, in parliament, the opposition makes it a point to find out the lacunas. कहां कुछ करप्ट प्रैक्टिस हुआ है. So this is how CAG's report contribute to democratic deliberation and thereby holding government financially accountable. That's a very important purpose. अब देखिए, वो इंटरनल चेक है, वो इंटरनल चेक काम कर रहा है. करता तो काम एग्जीक्यूटिव के अंडर है ब्रॉडली, लेकिन हेल्प किसको कर रहा है? वो हेल्प कर रहा है पार्लियामेंट को, और पार्लियामेंट ऑडिट रिपोर्ट को इस्तेमाल करके गवर्नमेंट को क्वेश्चन पूछ सकता है कि आपने ये कैसे किया, so on and so forth. This is a very internal kind of checking mechanism. आप दूसरा देखिए, that is, so ऐसे अलग अलग. आप FC देखिए, FC Now, are recommendations of Finance Commission binding on the Union government? Now, who appoints FC? It is the President of India every 5 years. But are recommendations of FC, Finance Commission, binding on the Union government? They are not binding. They are not obligatory. But a convention has been followed by almost all Union government that the recommendations of the Union Finance Commission are generally accepted. वो लेजिटिमेसी उसने एक्वायर किया है. हाँ, थोड़ा पॉलिटिक्स होता ही होगा, नो डाउट अबाउट दैट. बट एक लेजिटिमेसी जैसे बोलते हैं हम, एक नाम है, उनका एक पोजीशन है, और वो लेजिटिमेसी और उसको एक्सेप्टेंस भी मिला है फाइनेंस कमीशन को. सो दैट ऑल्सो प्लेज ए वेरी सिग्निफिकेंट रोल. ऐसे ये सारी बॉडीज है, इंडिपेंडेंट है, ऑटोनॉमस कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल बॉडीज है. एंड दिस इज a unique feature as far as Madhav Khosla's argument is concerned. I guess this is more than sufficient. So this is how we are going to read Constitution. I hope you got it. Articles कौन सा है, ये वो GS2 में पढ़ेंगे हम, और जिसका फायदा यहाँ भी होगा. But specifically what we are going to look into as student of Pol Science while reading Constitution is this one. Okay, is this one. Okay, that is very, very important. अब तीसरा उसको आगे लेके जाते हैं. तीसरा इज समथिंग विच ओवरलैप्स विथ. अब एक हुआ हमारा, दो हुआ हमारा, अब तीसरा है. ओके, व्हाट इज दिस? एंड दिस इज गोइंग टू बी अ वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट एलिमेंट ऑफ द सिलेबस ऑफ आईजीपी. कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल प्रोसेस. क्या है ये? कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल प्रोसेस. तीसरा एलिमेंट ऑफ आवर सिलेबस इज गोइंग टू बी कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल प्रोसेस. नाउ व्हाट इज मीन बाय दैट कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल प्रोसेस? प्लेन एंड सिंपल भाषा में, इन व्हाट एग्जैक्ट वे वी हैव पुट कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन इनटू प्रैक्टिस. उसका इंप्लीमेंटेशन हमने कैसे किया है, इंप्लीमेंटेशन एग्जीक्यूशन हमने कैसे किया. अब देखिए, एज स्टूडेंट ऑफ पॉल साइंस वी आर सपोज टू नो द प्रोविजंस ऑफ कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन ऑफ इंडिया, the separation of the scheme of separation of power, the parliamentary system, the federal system, autonomous bodies, so on and so forth. तो ये तो है पहला हिस्सा. लेकिन the other thing which is going to be way important for us as student of pol science is the manner in which we have put constitution into practice. इसीलिए constitutional process उसको बोला. अब उसमें क्या क्या आने वाला है ये भी देखते हैं. ओके, उसको सिंपल करते हैं. एक्सपेक्टेशन क्या है, यानी कि जिसको हम ऐसा भी लिख सकते हैं ना, एक्सपेक्टेड रोल है ना. एक्सपेक्टेड जो कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल प्रोविजन से पता चलेगा कि व्हाट इज द, क्योंकि प्रोसेस तभी समझ में आएगा ना कि कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन ने क्या एक्सपेक्ट किया है, यानी कि व्हाट रोल इज गिवन टू द ऑफिस. अब देखिए गवर्नर फॉर एग्जांपल. नाउ गवर्नर लाइक प्रेसिडेंट ऑफ इंडिया, जैसे यूनियन में वो कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल हेड है, सिमिलरली गवर्नर्स आर कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल हेड्स ऑफ द रिस्पेक्टिव स्टेट. ओके, अब पहला, फिर हमें एक्सपेक्टेशन पता चला कि कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल हेड के तौर पे उनको कंडक्ट करना है. दूसरा, बिकॉज ऑफ फेडरलिज्म, द ऑफिस ऑफ द गवर्नर इज ऑल्सो सपोज टू एक्सपेक्टेड टू play the role of a link between the union and the state, not the agent of the union, but the link between, दुआ बोलते हैं ना हम ऐसे, the link between union and the state, because we cannot and we should never forget that governor is a constitutional head of the state. So he is supposed to play the role of the link. ये expected है. अब दूसरा हमें उसके बारे में पढ़ाई करना होगा कि एक्चुअल रोल बोलिए उसको, या एक्चुअल उसका फंक्शनिंग है. ओके, एक्चुअल क्या हो रहा है, रियल में क्या हो रहा है, वो फोकल पॉइंट हमारा होना चाहिए. अब इसमें बहुत सारे एस्पेक्ट्स होने वाले हैं. ओके, पहला तो हम उसको बोलेंगे, नाउ इफ गवर्नर इज not conducting as per the expectations of the constitution, then why that is happening? Okay, why that is happening? We have to find out the causal factors. We have to identify the causal. ये क्यों हो रहा है? If there is a gap between the two, what do we expect from the office and what exactly the office is doing, there is a gap. Okay, और वो उल्टा गैप नहीं है, कुछ बहुत बुरा ही एक्सपेक्ट किया था लेकिन बहुत ही अच्छा काम कर रहा है, ऐसा नहीं है, वो उल्टा गैप है उसमें. ओके, सो व्हाई दैट इज हैपनिंग, उसके पूरे के पूरे रीजंस हमें, कॉजल फैक्टर्स. ओके, पहला. दूसरा है व्हाट इज द इम्पैक्ट ऑफ दैट. दूसरा पहले हमें पढ़ाई करना है व्हाट इज द इम्पैक्ट ऑफ दैट, यानी कि कॉन्सिक्वेंस उसका क्या हो रहा है. सो फॉर एग्जाम्पल पार्लियामेंट, हाउ डू वी एक्सपेक्ट आवर पार्लियामेंट टू फंक्शन. तो हम बोलेंगे कि एज अ इफेक्टिव representative and deliberative organ. So it must represent all sections of, yeah, cross section of Indian people. It should take up issues of all sections of people. It should deliberate, it should discuss, it should debate, so on and so forth. That is what we expect from our parliament. But does that happen in asal reality? It doesn't happen. So why doesn't that happen? Causal factors. उसमें जितने भी factors है उसको हमें identify करना है. That is how we are going to what study something called as the constitutional process, यानी कि implementation. उसका नतीजा क्या हो रहा है, सॉरी नतीजा नहीं, उसका परिणाम क्या हो रहा है, कॉन्सिक्वेंसेस क्या हो रहा है उसका, ये भी हमें पढ़ाई करना पड़ेगा. इम्पैक्ट क्या है उसका, इन्फ्लुएंस क्या है उसका, कॉन्सिक्वेंस क्या है. दूसरा. तीसरा, ये जो हो रहा है उसमें से कौन से इश्यूज सामने आ रहे हैं, उसको क्वेश्चन ही करते हैं. कौन से इश्यूज, इश्यूज का मतलब है प्रॉब्लम है. ओके, अब देखिए, we have the issue of defection and that is day by day increasing. Okay, now long back in 1985 we inserted a new schedule in Constitution of India which is known as the 10th schedule, और जिसको एंटी डिफेक्शन लॉ कहा है. but that law has miserably failed in preventing the problem, yeah, let us say overcoming the problem and preventing the phenomena of defection. ओके, अब ठीक है, वो समझ में आया हमें. उसके कॉन्सिक्वेंसेस क्या हो रहे हैं, उसके कॉन्सिक्वेंसेस क्या हो रहे हैं, तो हम बोलते हैं कि इजीली हॉर्स ट्रेडिंग हो रहा है, इधर से उधर जा रहे हैं. ओके, अब वी हैव गॉट द इश्यू. हाउ आर वी सपोज टू मेक सेंस ऑफ द इश्यू. तो मेकिंग सेंस ऑफ इस ऐसे भी होता है कि उसके कारण क्या है, उसके परिणाम क्या है. दिस इज एनालिसिस. सो वी आर गोइंग टू लुक एट एवरी इशू इन अ एनालिटिकल मैनर. मतलब एनालिसिस का मतलब क्या लगाते हैं हम, एस्टैब्लिशिंग कॉज इफेक्ट रिलेशनशिप. व्हाट आर द कॉजेस, बाय आस्किंग द क्वेश्चन व्हाई, एंड व्हाट आर द कॉन्सिक्वेंसेस, उसके परिणाम क्या हो रहे. अब उसका भी हम मतलब लगाने वाले कि व्हाट काइंड ऑफ इश्यूज आर फेस्ड बाय. अब देखिए, पहला तो इश्यू ये है कि अपोजिशन इज रियली 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 इन ग्रेट ग्रेट ट्रबल. त्याला सुधारायलाच तयार नाही की आता उद्या किती अजून 4-5 लोक जातात का काय. म्हणजे दिस इज नॉट अ सीधा साधा इश्यू. दिस इज अबाउट द हेल्थ ऑफ इंडियन डेमोक्रेसी. फर्स्ट, हेल्थ ऑफ द अपोजिशन, the fate of the opposition, and thereby the health of the Indian democracy. Because any democracy and health of a democracy substantially depends upon how strong the opposition is. Now, if we got a very weak opposition because of the defection, तो वो इशू खाली एक पार्टी का नहीं है, खाली अपोजिशन का नहीं है, वो पार्टी का है, अपोजिशन का है, लेकिन दैट इशू acquires a larger what connotation and it is about the fate of the Indian democracy. तो ये सब इस तरीके से हमें देखना है. और लास्ट वाला पॉइंट उसमें होगा सिंपल सी भाषा में, जो जीएस में आप देखोगे लेकिन यहां भी हमें देखना पड़ेगा, व्हाट इज द वे आउट. सो रेमेडीज क्या है, मीजर्स क्या है, वे आउट क्या है. तो आप देखिए, एज स्टूडेंट ऑफ पॉल साइंस, वी आर गोइंग टू रिलाई सब्सटेंशियली ऑन द स्कॉलरली ओपिनियंस. स्कॉलर जो है, जो हम बीच बीच में उनके किताबें, उनका रेफरेंस लेने वाले हैं, एंड वेरी एनालिटिकल सजेशंस. ऐसा ऊपर ऊपर वाला सजेशन की बात हम यहां नहीं करेंगे, वो जीएस में चल सकता है, लेकिन यहां स्कॉलरली वर्क हैज टू बी यूज्ड, हैज टू बी एम्प्लॉयड. एंड देयर आर सो मेनी स्कॉलर्स हु हैव expressed their opinions, undertaken scholarly works, and they have suggested something about the issue, about the problem. और दूसरा जो जिसपे हम निर्भर रहेंगे, तो that is the verdicts of the High Court, important High Court, important judgments of the High Court, and importantly the Supreme Court of India. Okay, so this is how the kind of framework that we are going to follow. So कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल प्रोसेस में एक्सपेक्टेशन क्या है, एक्चुअल रोल क्या है, और उसके सब फैसेट्स हम देखने वाले हैं. दिस इज गोइंग टू बी द स्कोप ऑफ द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन. सो वन इज द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन टेक्स्ट एंड द अदर इज द उसका इम्प्लीमेंटेशन, और इम्प्लीमेंटेशन के ये सब पहलू हम देखने वाले हैं. सो दिस इज द थर्ड वन, एंड देन कम्स द लास्ट बट वन, चौथा जो है इसी सेक्शन में. सो पहला हुआ कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल बैकग्राउंड, दूसरा हुआ कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन, तीसरा हुआ कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल प्रोसेस, एंड नाउ अनदर वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट सेगमेंट ऑफ द सिलेबस ऑफ आईजीपी, उसका नाम है इंडियन पॉलिटिकल प्रोसेस. क्या है वो? And this is something that we are going to elaborately at length going to discuss from the IGP, because this is the core of IGP. If you ask me what is the core, तो ये core है, तो उसको भी हम define करते हैं. Now, what is mean by Indian political process? Simply speaking, Indian political process is nothing but interaction between Indian state and what? The Indian society. Okay, interaction between Indian state and society. Political process का मतलब क्या है, या पॉलिटिक्स का मतलब क्या है इस कॉन्टेक्स्ट में? सो इंडियन पॉलिटिकल प्रोसेस, यानी कि इंडियन पॉलिटिक्स प्रोसेस से उसको शब्द इस्तेमाल किया है. तो इट इज नथिंग बट द इंटरैक्शन बिटवीन इंडियन स्टेट एंड द इंडियन सोसाइटी. अब उसमें इफ यू चेक आउट द 7th चैप्टर, नीचे है वो, उसमें क्या क्या है देखिए, क्या क्या उसमें से समझ में आता है. वी हैव द फैक्टर ऑफ कास्ट, द रोल ऑफ कास्ट इन इंडियन पॉलिटिक्स. ओके, दूसरा है द रोल ऑफ रीजन, एंड दस वी हैव रीजनलिज्म एज अ फैक्टर इन इंडियन पॉलिटिक्स. देन वी हैव क्लास, द रूल ऑफ क्लास. देन वी हैव रोल ऑफ जेंडर. देन वी हैव रोल ऑफ एथनिसिटी. Then we have religion. अब जब हम रिलीजन का डिस्कशन करेंगे तो एक है सेक्युलरिज्म और दूसरा है कम्युनलिज्म. ओके, अब देखिए कितना सारा है. ओके, अब ये उसका एक पहलू है, और एक है यहाँ पे, लेकिन मैं उसको यहाँ पे लिखता हूं, दी इंपॉर्टेंट व्हाट टू से पार्ट ऑफ दैट. ओके, सो उसमें एक आता है पॉलिटिकल पार्टीज एंड द पार्टी सिस्टम. दूसरा आता है प्रेशर ग्रुप्स. तीसरा आता है सोशल मूवमेंट्स. ओके, एंड दिस इज द कोर ऑफ इंडियन पॉलिटिक्स एंड इंडियन पॉलिटिकल प्रोसेस. अब यहां से शुरू करते हैं और उल्टा जाते हैं. नाउ कैन वी मेक सेंस ऑफ इंडियन पॉलिटिक्स इन द सेंस ऑफ इंटरैक्शन बिटवीन स्टेट एंड सोसाइटी without studying the political parties? No, because parties is that structure of Indian democracy, या इंडियन डेमोक्रेसी क्या है वो, जो सोसाइटी और स्टेट को कनेक्ट करता है. पॉलिटिकल पार्टीज मे बी नेशनल, मे बी रीजनल, दैट डजंट मैटर. लेफ्ट, सेंट्रिस्ट, राइट, दैट आल्सो डजंट मैटर. बट पॉलिटिकल पार्टी, अब पॉलिटिकल पार्टी का एम ही क्या होता है हम सबको पता है. पॉलिटिकल पार्टीज एम एट गेनिंग पावर, एंड इन ऑर्डर टू, यानी कि यहां जाना है उनको. In order to acquire the seat of power, they have to first approach the society. They have to convince the people, appeal to the people, get the vote, win the majority, यानी कि mandate. Then and then only they can acquire the seat of power. So parties, political parties, so national parties, regional parties, and then we are going to study political party in a very systematic manner. The origin of parties, then the social support base of the party, then the ideology of the party, and the electoral record of the given party. ये चार आस्पेक्ट तो हम उसमें स्टडी करने वाले हैं. दैट्स अ वेरी इंटरेस्टिंग थिंग. द सेकंड फैक्टर या एक्टर बोलिए उसको, दैट वी हैव टू स्टडी बिसाइड्स द पॉलिटिकल पार्टीज, द प्रेशर ग्रुप. नाउ प्रेशर ग्रुप्स आर इंटरेस्ट ग्रुप्स, but the peculiarity of the pressure group as interest group is that they as interest group come together, mobilize themselves and try to influence the governmental decision making process, law making, policy making, adjudication, every, and they employ various techniques so that they can pressurize the government, the governmental decision making process, and get the government to make a law, make a policy, take a decision which safeguards their, which protects their interest. इसलिए वो इंटरेस्ट ग्रुप है, लेकिन प्रेशर डालते हैं अपना इंटरेस्ट सेफगार्ड करने के लिए, और उसमें अलग अलग टेक्निक्स का वो इस्तेमाल करते हैं. सो स्टेट सोसाइटी इंटरैक्शन में उसका भी हमें पढ़ाई करना पड़ेगा. अब स्टूडेंट्स एजिटेशन का हम प्रेशर ग्रुप के तौर पे भी हम पढ़ाई कर सकते हैं, लेकिन वो टेक्निकली वैसे नहीं बोल सकते ये है वो. हाँ, प्रेशर ग्रुप लार्जली वी कैन से सो, बट मूवमेंट, अब ये मूवमेंट नहीं कह सकते एक ही महीने का था या 40 दिन का 37 डेज था, लेकिन एजिटेशन डेफिनेटली कह सकते हैं, प्रोटेस्ट हम डेफिनेटली उसको कह सकते हैं. सोशल मूवमेंट लंबा चलने वाला एजिटेशन चाहिए, यानी कि सस्टेन्ड कलेक्टिव एफर्ट इज कॉल्ड एज सोशल मूवमेंट. सो वी हैड चिपको, ओके, वी हैड नर्मदा बचाओ, उसको मराठी में नाम तो आंदोलन ही कहा जाता है, लेकिन इट वाज अ मूवमेंट, इट वाज अ चळवळ, इट वाज अ मूवमेंट. यानी कि सस्टेन्ड अगर है ना वो, तो उसको हम मूवमेंट कहते हैं, लेकिन थोड़े दिनों के लिए जब होता है तो उसको आंदोलन यानी कि एजिटेशन कहते हैं. आप देखिए, व्हाई डू वी नीड, नहीं नीड का बाजू रखते हैं, व्हाई डज एनी सोसाइटी विटनेस राइज ऑफ मूवमेंट, राइज ऑफ प्रोटेस्ट, राइज ऑफ एजिटेशन? पहला तो आंसर हम ये दे सकते हैं, बिकॉज ऑफ द फेलियर ऑफ द टू काइंड्स ऑफ प्रोमिनेंट एक्टर्स, वन द वेरी प्रोमिनेंट पार्टीज and the other is the pressure group. Okay, so if they fail in taking up the issue which is faced by some social section, then they come forward and they make it a point to ventilate their own grievance, mobilize at least the interested parties and the stakeholders and try to pressurize the government. यानी कि सड़क पे आते हैं, सिंपल सी भाषा में सड़क पे आना पड़ता है उनको, रास्ते पे आना पड़ता है. So that is the social movement, and these are very important actors as far as the Indian political process and Indian politics is concerned. अब ये देखिए बाकी के, तो these factors, okay, these factors in Indian politics are the outcome of the interface and the interaction between state and society. अब उसका बिल्कुल छोटा छोटा डिस्कशन हम करते हैं. Just we will sum it up. This is the last point. Did we expect caste to play a role in politics after independence? Answer is no. We didn't expect caste to play a role in politics of India, because our leaders, the entire movement, with some exceptions, but most of the movement, the leaders, the assembly, and the constitution thereby, they were aware of the fact that caste was a very deeply discriminatory and exploitative structure of our society, a feature of our society. So therefore they wanted and they imagined of complete elimination of the caste system. That was the vision. So therefore they never wanted caste to enter politics, and वो तो बात का तो फॉरगेट करे कि अक्वायर सच ए सेंट्रल पोजीशन इन द पॉलिटिक्स ऑफ इंडिया. वो हमने इमेजिन नहीं किया था, ना नेहरू ने किया था, ना डॉक्टर अंबेडकर इमेजिन्ड ऑफ दैट. दे हैड इमेजिन्ड अनाहिलेशन ऑफ कास्ट. बट जैसे जैसे हम लेट 50s में आते हैं, 60s में आते हैं, तो ये हमें देखने को मिलता है कि कास्ट बिकम्स द सेंटर ऑफ इंडियन पॉलिटिक्स. तो वो क्यों हुआ, तो उसका डिस्कशन हम करने वाले हैं. एंड व्हाट इज हैपनिंग टू द रोल ऑफ कास्ट इन इंडियन पॉलिटिक्स, क्योंकि वहां से लेकर आज तक हमें देखना पड़ेगा. द अपर कास्ट पॉलिटिक्स, द डोमिनेंट कास्ट पॉलिटिक्स, द ओबीसी विच इज नोन एज द मंडलाइजेशन, देन द पॉलिटिक्स ऑफ द दलित्स एंड द आदिवासीज, दैट इज द शेड्यूल्ड कास्ट. ये सब उसमें हम देखने वाले हैं. सिमिलरली region also become a very important factor in politics of India. Linguistic reorganization of state was the first major manifestation of regionalism immediately after independence. अगर हम पोस्ट इंडिपेंडेंस की बात कर रहे तो अलग अलग फॉर्मेशन में आता है. similarly the class. Okay. Now in paper 1, through Marx and Marxism, that we are going to study the lens of class, the category of class. Marxian ideology is a class perspective. और वो बोलते हैं सिंपल सी भाषा में कि if we want to analyze a society, then you should use the lens of class. So how Marxism defines the lens of class, the category of class, we will look into that. And gender. Okay, अब जेंडर में विमेन तो आएंगी, लेकिन विमेन के साथ साथ थर्ड जेंडर भी हमें पढ़ना पड़ेगा कि हाउ डज द फैक्टर ऑफ जेंडर, द रोल ऑफ विमेन, द प्लेस ऑफ विमेन, एंड ऑल्सो द थर्ड जेंडर कैटेगरीज, वो भी बड़ा है उसमें. ओके, ये भी हम पढ़ाई करने वाले हैं. एथनिसिटी स्पेशली इन रिगार्ड विद द नॉर्थ ईस्टर्न पॉलिटिक्स, यानी कि पॉलिटिक्स इन नॉर्थ ईस्टर्न पार्ट ऑफ इंडिया, वो भी हम पढ़ाई करने वाले हैं. रिलीजन दो चीजें हैं. एक तो हमने एक्सपेक्ट ये किया था कि रिलीजन शैल रिमेन पार्ट एंड पार्सल ऑफ आवर पर्सनल एंड प्राइवेट मैटर या लाइफ. thereby we prevented entry to religion in the public affair. Okay, so that is called as secularism, simply speaking. Secularism, the value of secularism, the doctrine of speaking. लेकिन ये हमारे एक्सपेक्टेशन के परे भी हुआ है. We didn't expect religion to enter the political realm, but religion ने वो घुसा है. And religion had become one of the factors of mobilizing people. And that is what the phenomenon of communalism. So what is communalism? Using religion for political purpose. Using religion for political purpose. So these are the various elements of the what? Indian political process. और एक लास्ट चीज है, उसका हम जिक्र करके हम will conclude next Monday. Okay. So Monday and Tuesday. So आने वाला वीक लास्ट वीक होगा जब हमारे दो ही लेक्चर्स होने वाले. एंड देन द नेक्स्ट टू नेक्स्ट वीक ऑनवर्ड्स वी आर गोइंग टू हैव द फुल क्लास फ्रॉम मंडे टू थर्सडे. ओके, वो लास्ट चीज क्या है? वी शुड नॉट फॉरगेट दैट द मॉडल ऑफ डेव्हलपमेंट. ओके, इन आयजीपी क्योंकि मराठीत जर बोलायचं झालं, हा सगळा खटोटोप कशासाठी करायचा सोप्या भाषेमध्ये म्हणजे, हा तो आप बोलेंगे कि सर ये क्यों, व्हाई डू वी प्रोड्यूस कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन, व्हाई डू वी एस्टैब्लिश अ स्टेट, डेमोक्रेटिक स्टेट. तो हम बोलेंगे ओके, सिक्योरिटी है, स्टेबिलिटी है, लॉ एंड ऑर्डर है, बट हाउ कुड वी फॉरगेट द लार्जर कॉज ऑफ डेवलपिंग आवर सोसाइटी. सो डेवलपमेंट also is going to be part and parcel of the syllabus of the IGP, but development in its broadest sense of the term. Social development, political development and economic development. But focus होगा economic development पे. इसीलिए नेहरूवियन मॉडल, then the Gandhian model. Okay. And then sustainable model of development. That is the alternative model of development. So तीन मॉडल तो हम उसमें definitely discuss करने वाले हैं. So that is how we will take it forward. अब I hope कि this discussion would help you, okay, in now making better sense of the syllabus, the scope of the syllabus, number one, and help you in making better sense of या understanding the PYQs. वो भी देखते चलिए from 2000 to 2025. Okay, so that's it. If in case you have any doubt, we can take. Otherwise, we'll conclude it. Now on Monday, you will get the first set from the note. Okay. And then you must have, I'm sure you must have started reading NCERT's political theory and then O.P. Gauba's introduction to political theory. O.P. Gauba's reference book, only reference book for the paper 1 section. Okay.